Whenever I'm talking pro wrestling with people who are both in or outside the wrestling fandom, it really doesn't take long for the subject of Roman Reigns to pop up. Sometimes it's the first thing people mention right out of the gate. I've had multiple conversations with people who've never seen a single episode of Monday Night Raw, where their only frame of reference is 1, that it's not real wrestling, and 2, that everyone seems to hate this Roman Reigns guy. This by itself is kind of fascinating to me. Regardless of my own opinion of Roman Reigns as a wrestler, it's amazing that everyone seems to know about both the man himself and the general perception of him within the world of hardcore wrestling fans. I'm sure in their heyday, everyone was talking about Hulk Hogan or Stone Cold Steve Austin or The Rock, even without having seen them in the ring, just because they were larger-than-life personalities that couldn't help but bleed out into the mainstream media. But they were usually being discussed in a positive manner, at least in relation to their place in wrestling. Outside of any newsworthy controversies that have cropped up in their career from time to time, the general public has, at least in regards to their wrestling personas, looked fondly upon these guys. Roman Reigns, on the other hand, is an altogether different scenario. And before I say anything else, let me be clear that I'm not making an argument that he sucks, or that everyone thinks he sucks, just far from it. Just that everyone is aware of the fans' vocal animosity toward him. It's almost become an integral part of who he is as a character. So how did this happen? How did Roman Reigns become so synonymous with boo? It's difficult to pinpoint any one thing that causes people to dislike Roman Reigns, because as far as everyone I've spoken to is concerned, there are an infinite number of reasons to dislike him, ranging from he can't wrestle to he's a terrible babyface, etc, etc. And while I don't want to discount anybody's opinions, I think it's important to remember that these are ultimately just opinions. They're not scientific facts that everyone is forced to conclude when they watch him. What is impossible to ignore, however, is that all of those negative opinions manifested fairly quickly within the wrestling community over a very short period of time toward a singular person, and that doesn't happen without cause. A lot of people have compared the audience's level of disdain for Roman to someone like X-Pac, who just so happens to be one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. This does not stop me from openly admitting that people despised X-Pac to the point that all he had to do was exist and people would boo and chant at him that he sucks. Some fans would argue that X-Pac's level of heat was useful, as it meant he could get the crowd to hate him without even trying. But the problem with that manner of thinking is not trying is a big part of why people hated X-Pac. The WWE made no real attempt to do anything interesting with him. He kept on living the same tired gimmick of a scummy, crotch-chopping punk way after the days of Degeneration X were long gone, and everyone else involved had evolved as characters or moved on to completely different things. The key to understanding why people hated X-Pac so much is an important step on the way to knowing why so many people decided to reject Roman. And it is a rather difficult thing to get your head around. You see, if the only reason people hated X-Pac is because he didn't spice up his character, I could point to any number of wrestlers who haven't altered a single thing about them, but fail to elicit anywhere near the same level of apathy or exasperation from the crowd. You don't see people booing Bray Wyatt out of the building, even though his character has been a broken record for the better part of the last 2 years. Or someone like Goldust, who has managed to remain essentially the same character whilst also staying a beloved fan favorite until his recent heel turn. It takes more than just being one note to inspire such mass repulsion from the viewers. So how did X-Pac do it? I'm sure a lot of you are saying, well, people liked Bray Wyatt and Goldust before, but nobody ever liked X-Pac, so obviously people would eventually grow sick of him, which is categorically untrue. X-Pac was a strong babyface character throughout most of 1999, almost to the point of being, in my opinion, one of the top 5 face wrestlers in the company, during a time when The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin were still active. That's a huge feat. Then X-Pac turned heel against Kane in a dramatic angle where he stole his partner's girlfriend and essentially spat on what was a fan-favorite storyline involving X-Pac teaching Kane how to be more human. And after that, I'd be hard-pressed to tell you what X-Pac did after that. Something about creating the stable X Factor and then... Nah, nothing. Can't think of anything. I could probably watch every episode of Raw and SmackDown from the middle of 2000 onwards, and I still couldn't tell you what the WWE did or were trying to do with X-Pac. And there's your problem. I couldn't tell you because they didn't really try to do anything to add to him as a character. And if the last real bit of character development you did with this guy was have him betray his friend, the audience is ultimately going to be conditioned to hate his face. The audience remembers things even long after the show itself has chosen to blindly and adamantly forget those events. When you think of WWE as a wrestling company, all of this venomous hatred being aimed at X-Pac might seem a little bit confusing. After all, it's not like he was a radically different wrestler in 2001 compared to the stuff that he was doing in the late 90s. But when you look at WWE as a television show, which is, in my opinion, how the people who make the WWE product themselves look at it, it becomes much easier to understand why the overall mindset of the audience was changed to just disliking him as a character to hating that his character even existed in the first place. Imagine one of your favorite TV shows. I'm sure that as much as you love that show, you can probably find one character in there that gets on your nerves. Let's say, for argument's sake, you love My Hero Academia, but you hate this guy, Minoru Mineta. Why? Because he's a one-note character who doesn't really add anything to the show, and he just makes you want to say, fuck that guy. If he were to be removed from the show, you're relatively certain that the show wouldn't suffer for it, and if he were to evolve as a character or get his comeuppance, you might enjoy that, but for now, fuck that guy, right? That's essentially how people felt about X-Pac. After a certain point, the WWE fans just kind of realized, oh, this guy isn't going away, and he's not showing any sign of changing or learning or growing as a character. He just kind of shows up and says, hi everyone, I'm still X-Pac, here's a bunch of X-Pac things, okay, bye now. And after this happens for long enough as a fan of a television product, you've been conditioned by not only the WWE, but as TV as a medium to say, yeah, fuck that guy. A big part of why a large cross-section of hardcore WWE fans suddenly invested themselves in hating Roman is because of fuck that guy syndrome. He debuted on the main roster as a part of the wrestling stable The Shield, who are a fresh and interesting group with a cool aesthetic and no shortage of talent. Dean Ambrose was the loose cannon brawler, Seth Rollins was the brains who could hit you with a wide range of offense, and Roman was the muscle they employed to finish off their opponents. And Roman was over in this role. It would be silly to suggest otherwise. People liked Roman when given a limited role that played to his strengths. When he stood alone against Sheamus and Batista at the end of the Royal Rumble in 2014, it was Roman people were chanting for. It was a role and a situation tailor-made so that Reigns could look amazing and get the fans to rally behind him, because the WWE had obviously already decided that he was going to be the next face of the company. But much like X-Pac, the WWE neglected to realize that once someone is over, even as a face, it's not impossible for fans to become apathetic toward them should they be mishandled. And make no mistake, Roman was mishandled. That's my take on it, and I don't really know how anyone could see it differently at this point. After the Shield broke up, which was a good idea in retrospect, regardless of how bad it felt at the time, it gave Seth Rollins, Dean Ambrose, and even Roman Reigns to an extent, a new chance to show what they could do as singles talents. The biggest problem that arose between the breakup of the Shield in mid-2014 and WrestleMania the following year, in my opinion, is that the WWE had the option of building Roman Reigns up with a natural push that would see him main eventing WrestleMania in 2016, but instead chose the option of immediately pushing him to the top of the ladder by the time the Royal Rumble came around in just over 6 months' time. That the WWE was so impatient with Reigns to the detriment of a lot of their other potential talent, who were already in a position to main event, is a huge reason as to why fans turned against him as quickly as they did. Take it step by step, and it's painfully obvious. June 2014, the Shield breaks up. Dean Ambrose and Seth Rollins get new aesthetics and entirely new entrance themes. Roman Reigns keeps his Shield look and theme, which only serves to highlight that the WWE doesn't have a solid idea as to who Reigns is, outside of being associated with the Shield. Roman had a lukewarm feud with Randy Orton, which resulted in an even lukewarmer match at SummerSlam, and then became injured in the middle of a feud with Seth Rollins. This would have been a good opportunity for the WWE to take a look at what was and what wasn't working with Reigns, and bring him back as a stronger character than he was before. But unfortunately, impatience once again won the day, and they went all in with Roman. Upon his return at TLC in 2014, when he had been out of sight and out of mind for a good 3 months, he was immediately thrown back into the spotlight and treated like he was the bee's knees, which would have been okay if Roman had the personality or the understanding of who his character was to support that kind of a huge push. Unfortunately for everyone, however, Roman just didn't have the mic skills or the charisma that he so desperately needed by that point if he was going to be able to resemble the character WWE was pitching him as. When you look at all the other top names in WWE's history that have reached the level of a Hulk Hogan or a Steve Austin, you'll notice that before any of them even got near the main event, they knew what they were doing in the ring, but more than that, they knew who they were as a character and how to inhabit that role like like it was like second nature. By the time January of 2015 came around, Roman had yet to have a single memorable one-on-one pay-per-view match, and when given a live microphone, he was cutting promos that would have sounded bad coming from John Cena. But because they were coming from a Roman Reigns who had yet to even establish himself as a character, they sounded unimaginably horrible. Throwing around phrases like suffering succotash and reciting the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. It made you wonder who this guy was even supposed to be. So is this giant muscle-headed monster who is also a Looney Tunes enthusiast? What is about this guy I'm supposed to understand, let alone enjoy? So at this point, the WWE clearly doesn't know who Roman is, but they're so determined that he's going to be their next star that they stay committed to this already hugely flawed trajectory. Because let's be honest, if they want Roman to be a star, he will be a star. It's just how the company works. I'm sure there were people booing John Cena 8 years ago, expecting the company to rethink its strategy with him, but ultimately, if they want to do something, they will do it, regardless of public opinion. They've proven this time and time again. But I'm not here to explain to you why the WWE did what they did. I'm just trying to figure out why it had the effect that it had on Roman Reigns. And to understand that, you have to also understand that the WWE had the option to pull back on the Roman Reigns push and wait another year before lighting the fuse that launched his enormous and never-ending push. This, in my opinion, is the main reason that fans all over the place started to resent Roman Reigns as a character, because they saw what the WWE was trying to do, and they saw how much of the product was being forced out of shape just to compensate for anything that would help Roman get straight to the top. They saw the path that was laid out for Roman, and they got angry about it because of the sheer number of other paths that were available, not just for the future star of the company, but for Roman himself. There was a way to get Roman over naturally and without so much bitterness from the fans. And the WWE staunchly and self-assuredly continued to do it this way regardless. The 2015 Royal Rumble is the moment that everyone realized just how much the fans had grown upset with Roman as a character and as a representation of everything they deemed flawed about the WWE product. If you want a specific match to watch and understand how this bitter seed had flowered within the WWE universe so quickly and so thoroughly, watch that Royal Rumble and pay attention to not just the crowd reaction to Roman, but their reaction to most of the events that unfold. The elation when Daniel Bryan makes his way out, and how deflated they become when he's eliminated maybe halfway through. The way the final moments of the match play out with Big Show and Kane slowly dropping fan favorites over the top rope, as if the booking team honestly said to themselves, well, Roman isn't that over, but when the fans see these heels eliminating all their best guys, they'll have to cheer for Reigns. Hell, throwing The Rock out there in a last-ditch effort to ensure that Roman would be cheered by mere association is so very telling that the WWE simply didn't have faith in Roman to get himself over. For it to be made so apparent that they don't have faith in him to get himself over while at the same time telling you, this guy's going to main event WrestleMania, you can understand why Collective Jimmies would be a bit rustled. The crazy thing is, all of this would have worked exactly as planned in the 1980s, and probably would have worked to an extent in the 90s. But in this day and age, where the audience is as wise to the WWE's way of thinking and their strategies as they are, they see the way the strings are being pulled, to the extent that when they booed Roman as violently as they did that night, they were booing the decision to put Roman in this position just as much as they were booing the actual guy. People didn't just decide all at once that they didn't like Roman. It's an attitude that had developed over the course of several months of being shown time and time again that the WWE had picked this guy, the character that hadn't even been properly realized yet, to be the main character of the TV show that we all watch. Imagine the X-Men movie franchise, the exact same way that it has been. Except Hugh Jackman made no attempt to understand who the Wolverine character was, and half of his lines were just randomly quotes from Tiny Toon Adventures. And then inexplicably, he's the main character of these movies. People would reject that. It's hard to explain why Roman Reigns is hated until you realize that in the world of WWE, the audience is an essential character. It's a wild and unruly character that frequently ignores direction, but it's a character all the same. And the way Roman Reigns reached main event status suggested that as a character, the audience was being totally shortchanged and ignored. So obviously the audience is going to turn on him the same way that Seth turned on the Shield, because much like Seth in that situation, we saw the path that we were traveling down and decided to reject it in favor of any number of better paths. Now don't get me wrong, I know none of what I just said may even apply to you. You may hate Roman for completely different and perfectly valid reasons, but I'm not trying to explain why each of us individually hate Roman. I'm just trying to make it clear as to why everyone turned on him in such a short span of time. So please, don't feel the need to tell me about how you personally don't think he's a good wrestler, or how you think he's got an ego. I mean, these are all personal and subjective views that wouldn't have taken hold on such a wide scale, because the simple fact is that not everyone feels the same way. I disagree with the idea that Roman Reigns is a bad wrestler, but obviously for a lot of people, it's easier just to say that and believe it than examine and understand that this is a much more complicated problem that the WWE itself caused. In summation, the WWE fans turned on Roman not specifically because of anything Roman did, but because of the way the WWE presented what he was doing. There was a disconnect between what we, the audience, was seeing and what the WWE was telling us was happening. This put Roman in an awful position. He had to just keep fighting through all the negativity and the hate until hopefully he would find some strength within himself and his character to compensate for all of this. The ball got dropped and it seemed as though the WWE just kind of left it lying on the ground, hoping that Roman would eventually bend over and pick it up for them. Meanwhile, the WWE audience stood there pointing at Roman, laughing as he stared vacantly at the ball, hoping it would roll back his way of its own accord and nobody would notice anything was dropped in the first place. So that's why people initially and almost unanimously turned against Roman Reigns. But why do people still hate him to this day? Some of you may be a little confused. After all, didn't I just spend the last 5 rambly minutes nattering on about why people hate Roman Reigns? Surely I've already answered this question. Truth is, I only explained why people began to hate Roman back around the time when his rocket had been launched and he was making a beeline for the WrestleMania main event. We're more than 2 years removed from that situation, and a lot has changed, but if there's one thing you can rely on every Monday night, it's that as soon as Roman Reigns' entrance music hits, the vast majority of the crowd will boo until they're blue in the face. Here's where I'm gonna say a bunch of stuff that you'll probably strongly disagree with, and that's okay. Roman Reigns has improved significantly in a number of areas. He's improved as a wrestler enormously. I'd be hard-pressed to recall a single bad match he's had, with one notable exception with extenuating circumstances in the last year or so. In fact, if you were to ask me what my favorite match of 2016 was, my top 3 picks would probably include Roman's match with AJ from Payback 2016. The only match I can point to that as being below average was Roman's match with The Undertaker at WrestleMania, and frankly, you can't pin the quality of that match on Roman. The list of people who could have worked a good match against Undertaker at that point in his career would be about 2 or 3 names long at most. Roman was just in the right place at the wrong time in that situation for a number of reasons. But not only have Roman's ring skills improved, he's also much more at home in his character now. And while yes, his character hasn't exactly been drastically altered since early 2015, he's been allowed to play it a great deal more loosely. You can tell he's a little bit less scripted and he takes pot shots at the crowd whenever they're rallying against him, but in a way that establishes that no amount of booing will affect his composure. Not like a heel way. Given that he just kind of stood there smiling like a confused child during the negative ovation he received at the Rumble in 2015, his responses and reactions to crowds these days are like night and day in comparison. He's also completely stopped making cartoony wisecracks, but more than that, he stopped pretending to be something he isn't, and is instead portraying a version of himself. He's using the fans' negativity to bolster the idea of this person who lets challengers and haters bounce right off this armor he's been able to construct for himself, both physically and mentally. Experiencing the hatred of hundreds of thousands of people aimed directly at him has given him more character, which is ironic given that people boo him because they don't like that character. I'm not going to argue that Roman is the best mic worker in the company, ignore that he's the best wrestler that they have, but to ignore the fact that he has made major improvements over the last 2 years would be, in my opinion, willfully ignorant. So why is the booing not abated? Why do people continue to harbor this loud, angry resentment toward Roman Reigns despite anything he's done? There's a few arguments that could be made, of course. For some people, it's because they just inherently do not like what he represents. The idea of this one superhuman wrestler who can overcome all the odds and beat literally everyone else and stay at the top of the pile. You can see why that wouldn't be for everybody. It's kinda boring. And it makes it difficult to become invested in any of the other wrestling talent when you know that somehow, some way, they will inevitably find themselves being fed to the guy at the top of the food chain. I'm going to return to this point later in the video, but ultimately, I don't think this alone is why most people still hate Roman. I think it's a big factor, but it's not the main reason. From my perspective, the main factor that has caused people to continue to boo Roman Reigns long after they made the crucial mistake of pushing him too far too soon is that we as an audience have been conditioned to do so. In much the same way that we're conditioned by any other piece of media to react to it a certain way, the WWE has, intentionally or otherwise, ensured that we're going to keep booing Roman, probably till the day he retires. It all kind of ties back to what I was saying before about the audience being a character within the realm of WWE as a piece of TV media. We are part of the show. We're told time and time again that we play just as much a role as the WWE universe as any of the WWE superstars do. So when you're watching the show and you see the audience behave a certain way repeatedly over a long course of time, you begin to acclimate toward that because the character is essentially you. The WWE has made no attempt to encourage this, of course, but by going out of their way to ignore the fans' booing, by going out of their way to manipulate footage and audio, and present the crowd reaction as different to what we can see and hear with our own eyes and ears, that discouragement goes all the way back around and becomes encouragement. Let's say Vince McMahon is the director in a scene featuring two characters, one being Roman Reigns playing himself, and another character being the WWE Universe played by you. Vince McMahon just kind of lets the scene play out, and in the script it says Roman Reigns exists and the WWE Universe cheers for him existing. But given that you're the actor and you have your own instincts, you decide to ad-lib and boo him instead. And instead of specifically addressing the problem and telling Roman how to elicit a cheer from you, or even confronting you directly and saying, no, you're not supposed to be booing in this scene, Vince just says, okay, that was good, we'll fix it in post. Your instinct would remain the same. Neither the director nor your co-star are giving you any indication that you should stop booing, just that your performance can, and probably will, be changed after the fact. This gives you no incentive to stop booing and start cheering. If anything, it would just reinforce your decision to boo. This is essentially what happened every single time Roman Reigns came out to wrestle post-WrestleMania 31 until, I want to say, just after the first quarter of 2016. They continued to try and force this disconnect between how the audience was really behaving and how WWE would have liked them to behave. From my perspective, this blatant example of the WWE sticking its head in the sand only encouraged the crowds to boo even louder. And given that it continued for as long as it did, the crowds just became conditioned to feel that this was the appropriate response to Roman Reigns. It became more than just protest. It became tradition. We as an audience, and therefore as a character, were conditioned to hate Roman Reigns because the WWE wanted us to just give up and like the guy without any extra effort on their part. And much like with people who are universally beloved, if you're conditioned to love someone as an audience, you will tend to ignore a great deal of things they do wrong because you've grown to love them over a long course of time. Likewise with people you hate, if you're conditioned to dislike them, you will ignore a great deal of their improvements unless there's some sort of huge, significant retcon or reset button that the WWE at this point is just too reluctant to hit with a character as valuable as Roman. This brings me to my third and final bullet point, and it's a doozy. How do you fix Roman Reigns? In order to understand how to fix Roman Reigns as a character, it's important to know why he needs fixing in the first place, hence the lengthy preamble that preceded this segment of the video. If you're still confused as to why people dislike Roman, or you skipped to this part because you already knew all the stuff from the first half of the video, and I don't blame you, in summary, I think the main point we can agree on is that WWE mishandled Roman and pushed him too far too fast, essentially having him run a marathon before he'd even learned to crawl. But perhaps more importantly than recognizing what is wrong with Roman is understanding what is right about him, at least as far as where his status is today. Because a lot of the criticisms that people continue to level at him don't hold nearly as much water as they did when crowds started turning against him. One criticism is that he's not a good wrestler, which from my point of view is just no longer an issue. In the last 12 months, he's been putting on consistently good or at least great pay-per-view matches, and has even been responsible for a lot of stellar Raw main events. And ultimately, the idea of what makes a good wrestler is different from person to person, but what should be consistent with everyone's definition is that a good wrestler should be able to make you care about what goes on in the ring. And more than a lot of people on the WWE roster, even in a negative sense, Roman makes you care. There's a reason that instead of chanting his opponent's names, people choose to chant Roman sucks. Does this make him the best wrestler? No. Does this make him the best person to be in the position that he's in? Probably not. But it's a genuine flaw that he's worked through and come out stronger for doing so. Another criticism is that he's not good on the mic. And no, it's certainly not his strongest skill, but the WWE has refined his character to the extent that he's no longer saying things that are unbelievable, which is the main problem he had. His character has become more consistent, and he has become noticeably more comfortable in his own muscly, oiled-up skin. Is there room for improvement here? Definitely, but my point is they're already on the right track in regards to the way he behaves and presents himself on the microphone and in character. He's gone from being the wisecracking superhero character who just wants to entertain people to the arrogant giant Samoan who doesn't just think he's the top guy, he knows he's the top guy. That's an actual character, and if it rubs you the wrong way, that's kind of the point. What matters here is that his character feels genuine now, and Roman no longer comes off as this guy with limited confidence doing a pantomime of John Cena. There's no fix necessary for that aspect of Roman. The problem, of course, is that Roman has been committed to a trajectory where no matter how well he does getting from point A to point B, or even point C, it's point A that people are concerned with, where point B is becoming a main eventer and point C is reaching #1 guy status like a John Cena or Hulk Hogan. Point A is the moment where his push began, and that's the part that most fans still remember, like a wound that keeps getting aggravated by the mere memory of how poorly handled it was. No matter how much he improves, no matter how much he betters himself as a performer, if the foundation of that performance is seen as being so inherently flawed and doesn't sit well with the audience, they're going to resent him for that. So long as he's stood in the spotlight, people are going to be able to see all of his flaws, even the ones that no longer exist, with much greater clarity than they would with any other wrestler. It's all part of how we're conditioned as a TV audience. To reiterate my point from earlier, the same way you probably still enjoy a wrestler that you've liked for years if they were booked like shit for month after month, you're still going to continue to resist a Roman Reigns push no matter how well he performs or how well he's booked. And that's okay. It's not on you to change the way you or anyone else views Roman Reigns. Just like it's not really on me to change the way you see him, and I doubt I could if I wanted to. It's ultimately the WWE's role to fix the Roman Reigns problem of how he's become perceived. So how do you do that? If improving in the ring isn't going to be enough, because it isn't, and if improving on the microphone and as a character isn't going to cut it, because it doesn't, what does the WWE have to do to fix the Roman Reigns problem? The general consensus amongst people I've spoken to is to turn Roman Reigns heel. The argument, and it's a solid one, is that in order to ingratiate himself to the fans, he needs to have a monster heel push that plays to his strengths. Because let's face it, the man looks like a goddamn supervillain, and they were initially presenting him as a superhero. All the other top babyfaces in the last 2 decades or so have done this. Stone Cold Steve Austin evolved as a heel to the point that he dang near overturned the whole alignment system in wrestling. The Rock failed spectacularly as a babyface initially that they were forced to turn him heel, but more than that, they allowed him to be a more true-to-life character that he was comfortable with. John Cena's run as a heel was an important part of getting him over as a future main eventer. It's one of the reasons both casual fans and hardcore fans gravitated to him so quickly. So if that's the case, then obviously turning Roman heel would fix everything, right? In my opinion, no. Because while yes, it worked for Austin, Rock, and Cena, their heel runs, at least the initial heel runs that defined who they became, all happened the moment they touched the ground in the WWE. The Rock had a brief stint as a flawed babyface, turned heel for about a year or more, and then found his footing and was catapulted into the stardom that he now enjoys. Cena turned heel and grew into that character until fans were solidly behind him. It's also important to note with Cena that having a heel turn did not deter crowds from booing him, because ultimately, the way the WWE presented him by cramming him down our throats ended up making us not care if he was heel or not originally. He became a much duller character as a babyface. Because quite simply, modern WWE doesn't know how to book babyfaces. I'll come back to that point in a little bit. So why wouldn't a heel turn work to fix this Roman Reigns situation? Well, as of right now, Roman isn't in the same position that Cena or Austin or The Rock were in when they turned heel. They were fresh as a daisy to the viewer, essentially brand new talent in the realm of WWE, where they were able to alter their characters to that extent. A repackaging as a heel works when you're starting out like that, because people haven't already been conditioned to feel about or interpret your character a very specific way. Roman turning heel now would do very little to quell the booing, and while I understand that half the point of being a heel is to get booed, if the objective is to get Roman over as the main star of the company, this doesn't solve that problem, it just distracts from it. And remember that the WWE is determined to have him be the main star. Another problem with turning Roman heel right now is that it does more damage than it fixes. At WrestleMania 17, Steve Austin turned heel in spectacular fashion right before The Rock left to go film The Scorpion King. It was a memorable angle, and in my opinion, a really cool story, but it killed the WWE's momentum and caused its TV ratings to plummet. A heel Austin with no babyface even remotely close to The Rock there to compensate for it caused a lot of viewers to tune out in droves. And we could argue plenty of theory as to whether or not Austin's heel turn was ultimately good for him. The truth is, it was ultimately bad for the WWE. And furthermore, the people who perceived Roman's push as a bad decision need to understand that the reason they should be concerned is because of the effect it has on the WWE itself. If you view their top guy as being flawed, your concern obviously has to be that they need a better top guy. But if you take their current top guy and turn him into an antagonist, that doesn't solve that problem, it just leaves a vacuum. And both relatively recent and long-term viewers are going to be confused or scared off by this. The difficulty a lot of people have when viewing this situation and arguing that a heel turn would fix it is that they're looking at WWE like it's a wrestling company, like any independent promotion out there. But that's not how the general audience looks at it, and it's certainly not how the WWE looks at it. The WWE views and presents itself as a TV show first and foremost. Sometimes it's even pitching itself as a movie. And sure, if this were an indie wrestling company, they could probably afford to turn their top wrestler heel, because they don't live or die based on whether their story presentation holds up. They live or die based on whether their wrestling content does. WWE is a different animal altogether. If their top guy is Luke Skywalker, their top heel is Darth Vader. How do you turn a heel into a babyface? Well, in Darth Vader's case, you present an even worse evil in the Emperor for him to overcome. It works in a similar fashion when turning the hero into a villain. In the case of Roman Reigns, he's like the Anakin Skywalker of babyfaces. Everyone wants him to turn into Darth Vader, but if you were to listen to the fans, they would want him to do that without a Luke Skywalker in place to contend with him. And yes, for a lot of us, watching a TV show where Darth Vader murders helpless Jedi every week might be entertaining, but for a general audience, it's off-putting, because there's really nothing to latch onto or invest in, because there are no Luke Skywalkers on the main roster for him to be challenged by. None of the WWE's babyface talent is even close to the level that Roman Reigns would be if he were to turn heel, and nobody on the heel side of things would benefit from a face turn because, to refer to my earlier point, the WWE doesn't know how to book babyfaces. It might help Roman a little bit, but it would damage whoever they tried to turn face to fill the vacuum he left behind, and ultimately just damage the company in general. The biggest issue I have with turning Roman heel is that he simply doesn't need to anymore. He isn't behaving like a babyface, and frankly he shouldn't be. I've had a lot of discussion on social media about whether or not Roman is a heel, because he's been doing things like goading the crowd and behaving arrogantly, and yes, trying to commit vehicular manslaughter. But those are only heel actions if you choose to view them as such, and in actuality the WWE is not presenting him as the bad guy in any of these situations. When Roman feuded with Rusev late last year, he did a number of things that could be interpreted as the behavior of a heel. From interrupting Rusev during his photo album montage about his family, to attacking him before their pay-per-view match even started. And yes, those can be the actions of a villain, but until the WWE chooses to present them as such, Roman remains the protagonist at least. So long as Michael Cole is talking him up as this amazing sports entertainer and isn't condemning his actions, then as far as the WWE's alignment system goes, he's still the hero. A lot of the things Stone Cold Steve Austin did in his babyface run could easily have been presented as villainous, but because the WWE knew which way the wind was blowing at the time and wasn't scared to risk presenting him as the babyface for things like, threatening Vince McMahon with a fake gun until he wets himself, or trying to murder Triple H, he was the hero. So he's not a heel, but he's also not strictly a babyface either. He's what a lot of people call a tweener, in that he exhibits traits of both, but doesn't adhere to one side or the other. I personally still think of him as a babyface, just because the WWE is obviously still intent on portraying him as their #1 superstar, and that has traditionally always been a babyface role. Even when he does things like retire The Undertaker, or, as mentioned, try to murder Braun Strowman, the WWE just reacts to that by saying things that amount to, "Wow, that was crazy." Whereas if he was leaning more toward being a heel, you'd be hearing the announcers say things like, "What an awful thing Roman Reigns just did. How dare he?" He wasn't even reprimanded for trying to kill Braun Strowman by the Raw general manager Kurt Angle. So in my opinion, if he's not being treated like a heel by the mouthpiece of the company, he may as well be a babyface. But Roman is a special case in that he gets to walk that line, and that's part of why I think that right now, a heel turn would just be too much. It would be infinitely better in the long run to keep him right here as this tweener character, this sort of video game boss fight that isn't a villain or a good guy, and establish a credible babyface to take his spot, and then turn him heel. And I hear what you're saying, why can't they just have Dean Ambrose, or Seth Rollins, or Finn Balor, or AJ Styles take that spot? Truth is, I just don't think any of them are nearly at the level they'd need to be to counterbalance a Roman heel turn. AJ Styles maybe, but he isn't strictly a babyface either. He's also kind of a tweener, and it's hard to gauge where the WWE sees him. But he's definitely over enough to potentially be the top babyface. If I were to root for anybody to take that position, it would be AJ. Finn Balor could have been the top guy to replace Roman, if they'd been able to push him as the Universal Champion last year. But unfortunately, his injury threw a bit of a wrench in the works, and now I'd say he's at least a good 6 months to a year away from being even close to where Roman is, as far as the way the audience views them. So why not Seth or Dean? After all, they've been pushed almost as strongly as Roman from the get-go, and by association, everyone considers them equal to Roman due to their history in the Shield. Well, yeah, that's all true. But here's the fatal flaw, and this is what it always comes back to. As babyfaces, WWE has booked them like crap. Dean has been kind of flailing in the mid-card like a lunatic turtle that's been flipped onto the back of its shell, and Seth has been beset by injuries to the point that now it's practically his entire gimmick that he used to be injured. Only very recently have they been showing signs of understanding how to push Seth and Dean in a storyline together. But even then, I'd be hard-pressed to say either man is viewed the same way that Roman is at this point in time. The general audience would probably have a hard time telling you what Seth's finisher is, let alone his motivation. And as for Dean, most of his work in the last year kind of speaks to how unprepared he'd be if he was handed the role as main character of the WWE. And I like both those guys, but I just can't tell you that I feel like they'd be able to do it. What I'm saying with all of this is that a heel turn would only fix part of the problem, because ultimately, this isn't a Roman Reigns thing. There is no Roman Reigns problem. There is a WWE problem. That's what it all comes back to. The WWE is a TV show at the end of the day, and as a TV show, it has a very old school mentality. They seem to believe that you just need to have the one hero spouting catchphrases and beating all of the villains without breaking so much as a sweat, and that's enough to get viewers invested. But in reality, TV and media have evolved to the point that that this isn't even remotely what people want anymore. You look at any number of TV shows that are successful right now, and I can almost guarantee you that it isn't popular because the main character is cool and beats everyone all the time. In fact, frequently the protagonists of these shows aren't even good people. They're just people who are allowed to have flaws. The WWE is still stuck in the 80s where so long as you have an attractive star with a mustache and a slogan, that was a TV show. It simply doesn't work that way anymore, and that's another core reason why the viewing audience rejected Roman Reigns almost from the outset, because they were rejecting WWE's idea of what this show is. Referring back to my point from much earlier in the video, a show where a big muscular guy stands in the ring and says, "Nobody can beat me," and then proceeds to not get beaten, isn't really much of a show at all. But a show where several men and women stand in the ring and say to each other, "You can't beat me and I'll prove it," this is far more compelling. The WWE wants their show to have one boring-ass white bread main character, whereas audiences in general have been conditioned by literally every other TV show, it seems, to want a diverse, interesting cast of multiple characters. And there's really no reason the WWE can't have more than one main character, because they've done it before. The Rock and Steve Austin coexisting in the late 90s WWE is one of the reasons the show was as compelling as it was. I don't think the WWE is ignorant of this flaw, and I think they're taking steps to correct it. When you look at NXT, Asuka is pitched as being on the same level, if not more of a threat, than the NXT champion Bobby Roode. Nobody is really a supporting character, because everyone is the main character of their own story, which is a sense you don't really get from Raw. Especially when you're being reminded in the middle of other people's matches that yes, Roman Reigns will be showing up later to tell us something real important, because he's Roman Reigns. But knowing WWE, this isn't something they're just going to pull the trigger on overnight. And if they hope to create a lasting babyface with the star power of a Steve Austin or The Rock, they need to do it slowly and not just rush things like they did with Roman. Which is why this is not something you can fix by simply changing Roman, but something you have to fix by changing the nature of the WWE product altogether. Right now, the WWE roster is riddled with asshole heels and vanilla babyfaces, which inherently means the heels are always going to be more interesting, because they're the only ones that even so much as resemble characters. The WWE needs to learn what an audience wants out of a babyface, and not put all their eggs in one basket, because failing to avoid both of these problems is what created this Roman Reigns situation in the first place. I do think a Roman Reigns heel turn would do wonders for Roman as a character, but I think it should happen when you have a strong cast of other main characters. You can't just gamble everything on Roman again. That's what led us here in the first place. You have to hedge your bets, take your time, create a WWE universe that would benefit from a heel Roman Reigns, rather than just make it okay to boo the guy without it conflicting with the message you're trying to convey. In conclusion, there is a way to fix Roman Reigns, and in all honesty, I think the WWE already knows what it is. But it's not something that just happens like overnight. Roman can't be built in a day. I just thought of that. I ad-libbed that. In fact, because of the way audiences are conditioned, especially wrestling crowds, you'll be hearing boos for Roman when he comes out every year till his last match ever. But one thing you can also count on is that he'll be able to light up a crowd with a spot like few others can and have people cheering by the end of the match. Take a moment to really look at Roman Reigns in a vacuum right now, and you'll see that he's not really the source of WWE's issues. He's losing a lot more matches, he's putting over a lot of newer talent, and he's much more natural in his role than he's ever been. He's doing what he should be doing. WWE just needs to figure out how to deal with their end of things. What do you think? Because I know a lot of this probably clashes with how you feel, because everybody has an opinion on Roman Reigns, and that's a good thing. The fact that everybody does have an opinion on him means that we all have something to say, and we all feel passionately about this wrestling thing. But please tell me your opinion on how to fix Roman Reigns, or the WWE, or just whether or not you think Roman would be a better face or heel, because these are all interesting ideas with no right or wrong answers. I'll catch you next time with more of this smarky Mark Remark lark. Till then, it's Toodle Pip from me.